Siobhan Sweeney, you are so welcome to the Happier at Work podcast. I'm delighted to have you as my guest today. I think we've been connected on LinkedIn for a year or two, chatting about DCU, chatting about the Masters, and I see you popping up all over the place doing talks and talking about how great Hubspot is to work and diversity and inclusion. So do you want to give people a little bit of a background as to who you are, how you got into what you're doing, and yeah, we'll take it from there.
Brilliant. Thanks, Aoife. Thanks for having me on. I'm delighted to be here and really looking forward to the chat today. My name is Siobhan Sweeney. I use the pronouns she, her. In terms of inclusivity, which we're going to be talking about today, I'm just going to give a brief visual description of my hair. Of myself, sorry. I have long black hair. I have black glasses on today. I have a black polo neck, and then I have a cream and navy, and there's browns in there of a cardigan that I'm wearing today. In terms of my career history, I spent a lot of my growing up, as I'd say, in AIB, Allied Irish Bank, where I held numerous different roles, lots of change and transformational roles. And then my last role in there would have been leading diversity and inclusion. As part of that role, I went out on secondment for a year and a half to set up an amazing non-for-profit called the Open Doors Initiative. And I would say that was really when I got to immerse myself working with people from underrepresented groups. So asylum seekers, migrants, people with all disabilities and disadvantaged youth. So members of the traveling community, ex-offenders, LGBT plus. So that was my year and a half that I spent on secondment there. And actually I got to work with so many amazing different companies as part of that time at the Open Doors Initiative, and one of those was Hubspot, which I ended up coming out and working with Hubspot. So I'm there a year now, working in a global role, leading diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And I'm sure that we're going to get into that in more detail in a few moments. On a more personal level, I am a wife. I'm a mammy of 3 kids, a 12, 11, and 9. And I work, I'm calling in today from my home office here in Dublin.
Brilliant. Yeah, and I think like you say, maybe a great place to start is having a look at what those terms actually mean to you. This idea of diversity, inclusion, and belonging, because some of the different stories I've heard about what they mean, but I'd love to get your perspective on the difference between them and why they're important at work.
Yeah, I think that's actually a great place to start. And when I'm doing presentations as well, I would always start off with explaining the definitions as well, Aoife, because I think that we can all have a different perception of what diversity, inclusion, and belonging mean to all of us. So when I look at diversity, it's embracing difference, and that's all types of difference. And when I think about inclusion, it's feeling welcome, feeling part of a group, feeling like you can bring yourself to that group. And then when I think of belonging, it's more so tapping into that psychological safety where I feel like my voice can be heard, where I feel like I'm respected, where I feel like I belong, and where I can feel like I can show up and do my best work.
Mm. Yeah, love that. Love those as definitions. And when you were talking there about the inclusion, about feeling welcome, I was like, oh, where's she going to go now with this idea of belonging?
Yeah.
Because it's slightly nuanced then. So belonging is the sense that you feel like it's okay, that you can speak up. And I know psychological safety is something I've spoken about a few times in previous episodes of the podcast. I'd love to know then, from your perspective, maybe from any research that you've done, any companies that you've worked with, why is it so important? And is there such thing as too much diversity as well?
Yeah, I think that the way that we are now coming out of COVID-19, we were remote for such a long time. Now we're still in the bridge of that hybrid world, and organizations trying to figure out their ways of working and what's going to work best for them now going into the future. I think that when it comes to diversity, inclusion, belonging, but especially inclusion and belonging, I think that's more important than ever now as we as we interact with people and as we interact with our colleagues and with our teams on a day-to-day basis, I think it's integral. One of the things actually that's come up a lot around this, Aoife, is leaders reevaluating their leadership styles, which I think is so important actually. And I was only speaking to somebody last week about this, and I was talking about when I'm in a room and when I'm presenting, I use my body language a lot. I use my hands. I tend to walk around when I'm presenting. It's very different when you're doing that and when you're going through a slideshow when you're presenting to your colleagues all on Zoom or Teams or whatever platforms you use. And I think that's said as well for when you're having one-to-one meetings with colleagues as well, and in terms of that communication style. So I've definitely noticed that a lot of leaders are commenting on reevaluating the way that they would communicate, and also bringing about a more human-centered approach to their conversations. Like, you will know, before, when you're in an office, people don't know about your home life or what's going on. But since we've all been working from home, we've had multiple different distractions go. And if you haven't had distractions, you're very lucky. But like in my case, working from home, I've had my kids come in, or my dog barking, or somebody coming to the door, where that opens up the personal side of our lives a lot more as well, and brings about who we are as humans and our real authentic selves to the forefront. And that's something that I know that my leaders have talked about a lot more, and tapping into that more to get the best, not only out of themselves, but to get the best out of their teams as well.
Yeah, yeah. And in terms of, like, I know you've done a lot of research in this area. Have you seen anything that equates, why should someone embrace these types of changes at work?
For so many different reasons, and there's so much research now out there. I've done it myself as well, in terms of why it's so important to tap into diversity, inclusion, and belonging. It will increase your profits, number one. It will, the more diversity that you have within your organization, it will increase your market share. I've noticed that customers want to see it more. Customers want to know, do the people that you have working for them resemble them? Are your employees like the customers that we serve on a day-to-day basis? Stakeholders are demanding it more. And then it brings around so much better decisions and innovation. We know from, even, I'm going to go back to my days in the bank, financial crash. One of the main findings that came out of the Central Bank of Ireland was down to homogeneous teams and that group think that was present. So the more diversity that we have, the better. Now, in saying that, Aoife, it doesn't come easy. When you bring people together that are from different cultures, different backgrounds, and you pop everybody together, it's not like this innovation and great decisions and blue sky thinking are all gonna just pop out and start to happen automatically. It doesn't work like that. It takes time, it takes effort, and it definitely takes a lot of focus from the leaders to make sure that they're actually getting the best out of their team and nurturing that talent that they have there.
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that. And you brought up this idea of homogeneous teams as well, which is something that came up in the research I did as part of my master's. Just for anyone who doesn't know, we did the same master's, but we did it at different times. And so we were kind of chatting about findings and, like what was the course like, all of this kind of stuff. But that was one of the things, like when I was looking at values, a big piece of the research was, if you bring people together who are all alike, what happens then in the organization is that it becomes slower, it becomes underperforming. There is this mentality of groupthink, and maybe people don't feel safe to speak up because this is how we've always done things, and I don't really feel safe to challenge how things are being done here. So it's really interesting that you bring that up, and it's kind of addressed by this sense of belonging. I'm also so glad that you said that it's not easy. Like, it's not a case of just bringing a whole load of people together and then plonking them together and it's all going to magically appear. You actually have to have leadership skills in place to be able to extract that. And, you know, kind of going back to my earlier point about this idea of values, the thing that came out there was, if you bring people with similar values, so you're assessing people based on their values, not based on their background, not based on their skills, but based on the values that they have. And check also for diverse thinking. So do people think differently?
Yeah.
You know, your background is in a bank, you came from a bank. There's probably people from lots of different areas in Hubspot who came from loads of different industries, and they bring that thinking with them. They're thinking a little bit differently, and maybe they have different backgrounds to yourself. All of these things I think can happen. So any thoughts initially on that before we move on to like, well, how do we do something about it?
Yeah, I think that a lot of organizations want that and like the idea, just as you're even talking about that, they like the idea of innovation, they like the idea of bringing together better blue sky thinking and better decisions. But there's a big but there. That investment isn't always made when it comes to nurture, even though we know that as we talked about, Aoife, the findings are there in terms of this is what our customers want, this is what our stakeholders want. It'll bring us more profit. It'll make us better as a business and increase our shareholder value. Although we know all the positives are there, I haven't seen it that full investment across the board yet from customers, from businesses, sorry. And it is very much a journey, and there's not a final destination. I've been in this work for a long time now, and there's no final destination. When you read all of these books or you do X amount of research, you're going to know everything. That's not the case. It's constantly, when it comes to people, we're constantly evolving, and there's better ways to do things. And that's why we always need to, I guess, keep on top of the research and continue to learn and be inquisitive. But the one thing that I would say is organizations need to move past the tick boxing exercise of this is great and we're going to have diversity and inclusion in our organization. These are all the things that we're going to do, and have that down on paper or as part of their website, but not actually do anything substantial about it. Yeah. Because if you're just saying that, your staff know, your employees know, your customers will soon know that it's only tokenistic in terms of what you're actually talking about.
Yeah. And it's so funny that you say that, because there's a few things that kind of pop up for me. And this is first of all, related to the research I did and the work that I do with organizations in relation to values. And they say one thing on their website, and they say one thing across social media. They put things out there saying these are our values. But when you get to the organization, when you're actually in there and experiencing the behavior of the people who work there, it doesn't align with what they've said that the values are. There's a complete and utter mismatch. So that's the first thing that kind of springs to mind. And then the second thing is, we touched on it very briefly before we started recording, is this, what I've seen a lot of people talking about is greenwashing. And then just yesterday, I think it was, I saw someone post about well-being washing, when people say, oh, this is such a great place to work, we've a great work-life balance, and you're gonna be really looked after here, and you get into the organization and you realize that they're understaffed, and that's not the case at all, and you're going to have to end up working hours and hours. So like, is it the same with diversity then? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. As part of my research that I did when I was doing my dissertation, I looked at why organizations are getting involved in diversity and inclusion strategies, Aoife. And this was a real eye-opener for me. I feel that when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and belonging, it's part of my DNA now. I was so intrigued by I interviewed 25 people, right from CEOs to chief people officers, trickling down the whole way through organizations to get a real feel. And this was multinational organizations as well, to get a real feel of why they were involved, first of all, and what it actually meant and how it transpired within the organization. And my main finding that came out of the research was that it was tokenistic, that the organizations were doing it because they wanted it to be part of their mission statement and have on their company website. Another reason was they wanted to win deals with their customers, and this was something that customers were looking for when it came to diversity and inclusion. And then also was really interesting, some people spoke about their actual leaders within their departments actually trying to sway them away from being involved in employee resource groups and telling them to concentrate on their main job, that will get them the promotion or that will get them to the next level. The additional involvement with ERGs wouldn't. So it was very eye-opening in terms of hearing it, hearing people's perspectives. Also, a main thing that came out of it, especially the more senior you went up in the organization, was fear. Fear was a huge one of almost backing away from diversity and inclusion, because people were so scared of doing or saying the wrong thing that some senior leaders just shied away from it completely, so they wouldn't find themselves in a situation that they didn't want to be in.
Yeah. So did they kind of expand on what that might be? Like what were they afraid of, or is there something in particular that they were afraid of saying?
Yeah, so there was lots of different things. Terminology was a big one. Certain people felt that there was so much terminology and almost to the point of jargon that they didn't know what it actually meant, and they were scared to ask questions in a big group, because they felt as a senior leader within the organization they actually should know about it. That was actually probably one of the main things that came up, was around the terminology. And also fear of saying something to a person in case it was taken up the wrong way, and they would get brought up in front of HR then for saying something that was inappropriate. So instead of saying anything to a person, they would just totally shy away from it.
Yeah. So shying away from having those sometimes difficult conversations. In case they say the wrong thing and get brought up, there's no greater fear of being brought up to HR because you've said the wrong thing.
So it was really interesting, and just hearing it from different people's perspectives. One of the main things for me out of that was meeting people where they actually are on the journey. And when it comes to organizations, even though you might want to jump to a certain place and roll out all of this training, the organization might not be ready for that, and that's okay. It's getting a consensus from your stakeholders in terms of where they're at, listening and actively listening, not listening to what you want to actually hear, listening to where they're at, and meeting them there. So like that's something that I did when I came into Hubspot. Really worked with the teams, really listened to what they needed. And a lot of the things that I started doing were AMA sessions, like Q&A sessions, talking about my own background, my history, like we're having a conversation now, Aoife, and then inviting people to ask questions, to ask, maybe it was different terminology, to ask about disclosure, reasonable accommodations, and getting more conversation flowing around the topic. And just something that you said a few minutes ago was when you were talking about values and where the organization thinks their values are and where they actually really are. That's one of the things at a HubSpot that I absolutely love, is diversity, inclusion, belonging. It's one of our strategic priorities set out by our CEO, Yamini. She has 5 strategic priorities. Diversity, inclusion, belonging is one of those. but I don't have to be in the room for my leaders to talk about D&I.
Mm.
It's ingrained in everything that they do. It's part of the conversation now. So it's there, which makes it really, really authentic. But more so than that, it enables teams to be able to talk about it more because they know that they have that buy-in from leadership.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's so much to unpack there with what you're saying. And I love this idea that it's about meeting people where they are on the journey. And, you know, the temptation, I think, with someone like myself, especially, is I know what I want to do when I'm working with organizations in relation to values and happiness at work in general. And I want to kind of jump there straight away. But I love this idea of listening to where people are and seeing where they are on the journey. What, maybe taking a step back before we move on to the solution, but what is the impact then that if people are afraid of saying the wrong thing and they're not having those conversations because of that? What's the impact on the organization if something like that happens?
You're not getting the best out of people. You're not, and I know some people don't like talking about bringing your whole selves to work, or don't believe that you can bring your whole selves to work. And when I think about bringing your whole self to work, I don't mean bringing the kitchen sink and my 3 kids and everything into the room here with me. When I think about bringing my whole self to work, I think about bringing the best of Siobhan to work and how I'm turning up today. And that's the way I think about it. I think that if people have that fear, or if they have questions that they don't feel that they can ask, well, then they're not bringing their best self to work every day when they have all of this muddling over in their head. And maybe that's for a variety of different reasons, Aoife. Maybe that's because they don't feel like that their leader is listening to them. Maybe that they don't feel like they have that psychological safety to speak up, to learn, to contribute, without people maybe having perceptions of them. So I think that there's so many things that you can dive into in terms of the why people don't feel that they can ask these questions.
Yeah, no, I love this idea of, it's, you know, and this has come up a lot on the podcast recently, actually, this idea of the whole self. And the whole self is not like I'm bringing all of my anger with me and that's just who I am. It's about bringing your whole self. But I love this idea that it's bringing your best. It's actually bringing your best to work and being able to perform at your best because you feel like you're being listened to, because you're in that psychologically safe environment. And, you know, with the work I do around imposter syndrome, with the work I do around values, what I find is that we expend so much energy. If we have imposter syndrome, we're trying to conceal it in some way. We're overworking, we're trying to hide, and we spend so much energy doing that kind of stuff. If you're in an environment where your values don't align, or they're saying that the values are one thing, but they're behaving in a very different way, trying to mask who you are takes up so much energy that could be spent working, that could be spent not worrying. And, you know, it just uses up so much of our resources by trying to conceal ourselves or trying to hide who it is that we are.
Yeah. Absolutely. All that worry and anxiety that we're putting in if we're not bringing the best version of us to wherever we're going, if that's logging on remotely or going into the office. I think, yeah, there's so much there that we could actually tap into.
This is it. And then maybe we'll move on more to the solution. So if this is the case, you know, if we're meeting companies where they are on that journey, what are some of the things? I love this idea that you're talking about doing a Q&A, doing an Ask Me Anything, like any other maybe first steps that people can take on this journey.
Yeah, one of the first things that I did when I came into the team here, and it's a global, my remit is global, so it's EMEA, the Americas, and JPAC. One of the first things that I did for each of the regions that I was working with was do a listening tour. And I just think that's it's so powerful, meeting with different people from the region, and again, confidential conversations, but gathering all the themes and what are the key themes that are coming out of those conversations for each of the different regions. And you will definitely see, well, you should definitely see different trends. I know that I have. And it just enables you to get a clear idea of where you will need to focus and where your energy should go. I know we talked about it there a few minutes ago. Sometimes you might have loads of ideas in terms of where you want to go and where you really want to dive into. But by doing this, it can also highlight and pop out areas where you really need to focus your energy on first. Or it could be working with leaders within that region to concentrate on initiatives you might need to put in straight away if there's something burning there. But that comes out of, I think it's so powerful, speaking to different people, gathering themes, really listening as well, builds that trust, builds that psychological safety, lets people know who you are, I think, as well. And you can open up and let people see that vulnerable human side. And yeah, I think that definitely gets you supporters. And not only that, it allows people then to reach out to you when you start to build that one-on-one trust as well with people if they have queries or they want to do something within their region. And so that's one of the first things that I would say, definitely do the listening tour. Work with your leaders then as well within the area. See what's been done in the past, because there could be different initiatives that have run in the past. See if there's any measurement in terms of what was the success of those initiatives that have previously ran before you. Or if you're starting at scratch, work with the leaders to see what their ideas are, what they would like to do. And I definitely think if you can have focus groups and small focus groups where people can share their thoughts and their opinions with you. And then I love starting off then with a Q&A session or an AMA session if you have questions lined up already, and then open it up to the audience then to ask questions. And yeah, there are definitely a few things that you can do to start the journey.
I mean, so I think with a lot of things, the listening part is so important. And one of the more recent things that I'm thinking of and that I'm encountering with the organizations I work with is they're struggling with this shift to hybrid or bringing people back into the office. And every organization is looking to see what other organizations are doing, and they want to kind of emulate that. They want to copy that. And what works best is if you ask your people, what do they think is working, what's not working, what will work, and try and navigate it from that perspective rather than trying to take a framework of something that someone else has already done and apply it into a situation that might be very, very different. So that's kind of we could apply the same thinking to this particular situation when it comes to diversity and inclusion. It's not about taking a framework and doing it all the same. It's about listening to what people say. What ideas do they have? What has been tried before? Maybe it was the wrong time then, maybe we could try it now and it's the right time. You're further along on that journey. And I'd love to know, do you have any particular milestones that are recognized along this journey? For me, with most things, it starts with an awareness of what the current situation is, and then we sort of take it from there.
Yeah. We're really lucky, Aoife, at Hubspot. There's a huge investment in people, and it's not like any other organization where I've ever worked before in terms of how much investment is there and how much people mean to us within Hubspot. So within people operations, we actually have a culture team, we have an ESG team, and we have a diversity and inclusion team. So we have practitioners. So just like you would have your HRBPs within organizations, we have diversity and inclusion leaders that are assigned to different areas of the business. So all of us practitioners would work with different areas of the business and actually meet them where they're at. So for marketing, for customer success, for sales, and so on. And then we have another half of the business that works with our communities. So our communities are all our employee resource groups, and they would look at really creating communities within Hubspot to whatever groups that people align with, whether that's our Black Hub, our people of color group, our women at. And I know then on the more functional side, as I was talking about with the practitioners that we have that work with each of the business areas, again, it's gender focus has been a huge one for us to make sure that we're getting to parity. And as a company, we're extremely close to that. There's huge strides that have been made there. There's a huge focus on underrepresented groups as well, within Hubspot, including people of color, LGBTQI+. So all of that is measured on a consistent basis in terms of how we're doing. And we would work really, really close with the leadership teams within those departments. Then on a yearly basis, we publish our diversity and inclusion report that's published on our website as well. So everybody can see and go through the progress that we're making year on year when it comes to looking at diversity, inclusion and belonging as a whole, and see the progress that we're making. But again, as I talked about, we all play that part. It's not just the diversity and inclusion team. As I talked about, when it's a strategic priority within the organization, it's everybody's job. It's not just ours to make sure that we're moving the dial in terms of the progress that we're making, but also in the environment that we have now, the way the macro environment is, and the way the talent is as well. Like there's such a huge focus on hiring the best of the best talent in. And in HubSpot, we have an amazing talent. We want to make sure that we're retaining that talent. And something that we talked about a lot at the start, Aoife, was when we were talking about it being a tick box exercise or greenwashing for wellness or for D&I. That's something that comes up a lot from a recruitment process when we're interviewing people. I'm finding that more and more people want to know, well, what are you doing with diversity, inclusion and belonging? What does that look like? How can I be involved when I come into your organization? Yeah. And then from the wellness perspective as well, like, tell me, is there really unlimited personal time off? Does that really exist? We have a week off as well where our company shuts down in July, and that's one of our mitigations against burnout. We all shut down laptops and people can add on to that if they want to as well. But I'm noticing that more and more potential candidates, new hires, want to know, is this really real when they're coming through? And if it's not, I think that if it's not for organizations, and if there is that it's only a tick box, more and more people, especially that top talent, are happy to walk away from jobs. Yeah. It's not a career where you are there for you're a lifer anymore. Definitely not. Like, and maybe 3 to 4 years now in one job, and then people move on to the next. But if it's not what it says on the tin, people move on.
Yeah, I think it's very telling, Siobhan, that they're asking, is this really real? And to me, it suggests that maybe they've been burned in the past, where they've gone through this recruitment process and the company has made a lot of promises, and the situation hasn't turned out to be what they thought it was initially. And so now they need to double check, like, is this actually, you say that this is the case, but is it really? And I think from an individual's perspective, if they're going for a role somewhere, there are ways to figure out, like, you can tell whether people are just sort of going along with it, that they're really desperate to get you into the organization, versus if they're like, okay, and we have this program and we have this and we publish our diversity statistics, and it's really important for us to promote that type of culture here. But again, this sort of ties in with the research I did around values. And when people decide, not everyone decides to leave an organization. I have done it in the past, and I've talked about that on the podcast. I've done it a couple of times where this is not a good fit for me, so I walked away. But there's people who will stay in that situation ongoing, and it's disruptive to the organization. But the other thing I think worth considering is, like you were saying, the best of the best talent, they have options. And even if it's like it's a quite a buoyant market at the moment from a candidate's perspective, it's there's quite a lot of jobs going. So but even when it's not such a candidate's market, people who are really good and in high demand will have absolutely no problem leaving an organization. So I suppose it's never to think that it's okay to not have these initiatives in place, because it's people are desperate for jobs, and we can kind of treat people however however we want. We can treat people like they're a number as opposed to a human being, as opposed to an individual.
Yeah, I absolutely, I couldn't agree more.
Brilliant. Love that. We've talked about why diversity is important. We've talked about the impact that it has when it's not in place. And we've touched on steps to take in order to make it happen. Is there anything else that we haven't kind of covered that you wanted to get across in relation to diversity and inclusion at work?
Yeah, I think one of the probably the things that we haven't gone into in a lot of detail is again, it's kind of linking it back to what we were talking about in terms of window dressing, but in terms of the initiatives that organizations are taking when it comes to diversity, inclusion, belonging. I would say again, when it comes to celebrating days, I know like International Women's Day, Pride, whatever it is, just make sure that it's authentic in the way that you're doing it, and that you're living and breathing it within your organization. So if it's I would probably reverse by saying, what's the impact of the days that you're celebrating, and the why? Because otherwise, why are you doing it? That would be one of the things that I would say. So again, like the different initiatives that we want to roll out within our organization, it comes back to the why. Like, why are we doing it? Is it the right time? Are we doing it just because we think our customers will want to see it? Are we doing it because we think we have to do it for our employees? And then again, what's the impact? I think that when it comes to looking at the things that we are doing, sometimes we do a lot of things and there isn't the return on investment in those things that we're doing. And then again, it can also, if there's any people that are on the fence when it comes to diversity and inclusion, we mightn't be showing real value if we're only doing certain days within the calendar year. Again, it comes back to the why that you're doing things and how you're getting return on investment for the bottom line as well. I think is so important, and you're bringing people on that journey with you. Because if we're only celebrating days, we're not actually going on a journey within our organization. It's more so window dressing that we're actually doing.
Yeah, really good point. And I was gonna, like, what sort of sprang to mind when you mentioned about doing the days was, but are you doing anything for the rest of the year, or are you just saying
Exactly.
this one day, this is what we're doing, but actually the
Yeah.
rest of the year we're not really doing much to support this cohort of diverse people, or to support people in general in the organization. So I think that's a really valuable point to share based on that. I mean, we could probably spend a whole other podcast episode talking about the ROI and how to measure the ROI. And for me, it comes back to, well, why are you doing this in the first place? What is it that you're trying to achieve by implementing these initiatives? And, it could be food for thought that someone who's listening today is trying to jump ahead on the journey rather than listening to where they really are currently, and how to take that kind of the change a little bit more slowly, smaller steps, and listen to what people want on that journey. Like, my background is in research and data analytics, so when I did the masters and was doing all the research around that stuff, like, my eyes just lit up. Not everyone loves spreadsheets and data, but I do. So, like, looking at impacts and turning that into a story of how it has impacted on an organization, that's something that really, really lights me up. And I think it's really important to consider the why. Like, why are you actually doing this? And again, going back to earlier in the conversation, when people are doing it for selfish reasons, like, maybe the selfish reasons aren't always bad reasons, but
Yeah.
really it's in the interest of the organization to have these types of initiatives. But it's also in the interest of individuals, because we feel more fulfilled at work. And I suppose the whole premise of this podcast is that people feel happier at work. And when you feel happier at work, then you're happier in lots of other aspects of your life as well, because we spend so much of our time doing work that, you know, if you could be happier for those 8 hours a day or whatever it might be, that spills into every aspect of your life.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that as well, just to add to what you had just said there, Aoife, if we want to skip ahead, we want to, if people are thinking, okay, well, we haven't done much, let's just skip ahead and get ourselves even halfway down the road. It's, as I mentioned already, it's all about that journey. And if you decide that you want to skip ahead and be halfway on that road already, you haven't brought that people on the journey with you. You're just going there yourself. And the most important thing that you do is you bring people along the way, because one person themselves can't change a whole organization and the way that they do things. You need everybody. Everybody has a part to play in that. Everybody has a role within bringing diversity, inclusion, and belonging along. And that's why we need to kind of meet people where they are at in order to move along. And that's in terms of everything that we're doing. Like we talked about the why there and the impact. There's no point just celebrating calendar days if you're not going to do anything else. We hire people in because they're good talent. They're going to ask questions just like we would, in terms of, well, why are we doing this like just today and we don't do anything else? Like, what are we linking it back to? What's our overall North Star that we actually want to get to as an organization? What does that look like? And are we telling our staff that? Are we telling them where we want to go and the steps that we're going to take to make that happen? Because if we don't, people won't be coming along that same journey with us. And we'll be wondering why then we're not picking up followers along the way and bringing them with us, and why more and more people aren't getting involved or raising their hands to speak up and to be role models. Unless we do that groundwork, and unless we actively listen and meet people where they are, that's not going to be possible.
I love that. And it's left me feeling really inspired and excited for the future as well. And again, it probably could be a whole other podcast episode talking about bringing people on that journey and storytelling. Like, I know in some previous podcast episodes, we've talked about the power of storytelling, especially when it comes to business, and people, when they feel emotions about things, then they can really get behind it, rather than seeing kind of stats and figures. When you can talk about and share individual people's stories, I think it makes a huge, huge difference at work.
Absolutely. It definitely does. And I think the more real that you can be and the more authentic, especially with storytelling. I was only talking to somebody about this as well the other day, storytelling and the power of it. People warm to you and people want to know more, and people are interested in learning there as well when you're talking about it from your own personal experience, rather than theory or research, reading it in a book. The more authentic that we can make in terms of storytelling, the better it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Siobhan, the question I ask everyone who comes on the podcast: what does being happier at work mean to you?
Being happy at work to me means doing what I love to do to the best of my ability. So showing up, doing diversity and inclusion work with leaders, and doing it to the best of my ability with no boundaries really in place, or not feeling like I have any boundaries or walls around me. Getting to work and be my best when I show up every day, and bringing my authentic self, the best version of Siobhan, to the table.
Love that. Love it. So yeah, I mean, going back to what you had said earlier, it's about this showing up as your best self and being in an environment where it's okay to do that.
Absolutely, yes.
Mm-hmm. And if people want to reach out, if they want to connect with you, if they want to find out more about what you do, find out more about Hubspot, what's the best way they can do that?
They can do that through LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, so Siobhan Sweeney, you can find me on LinkedIn. And then also, if you want to check out Hubspot, you can check out our website and go onto our career portal as well. We're hiring at the moment. There's lots of great roles there, so people can go on and have a look.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks so much for your time today. I really, really enjoyed the conversation. There's a lot of things that I think people can consider when it comes to DEI and B initiatives. So diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, any of those kind of topics. And there's so many things that I think will spark a bit of inspiration in people listening today. So really, really appreciate that. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Aoife. Really appreciate you having me on.